Today on ESO Vlog, we take a look at the Good Guy Greg Templar PVE build. So what is the core concept of the Good Guy Greg Templar build? Well, it's very simple. It's designed to be a heavy DPS spec that is also capable of healing any content in the game. The capability to run this build during solo quest play, or the value of slotting as a DPS who is then capable of saving the entire group when shit hits the fan, those are both self-evident. What I want us to take a minute on is the healer. Right now the end game is the adventure zones. For those of you who don't know, adventure zones are 4 to 12 players and they have a competitive timed element to them. Well, the inevitable nature of an MMO is people gear up and they learn content. Now remember that competitive timed element. As people require less heals because they've learned the content and they've got the better gear, they're going to want a healer who can contribute a DPS element and shave valuable seconds off of their run. So long term, builds like this are probably going to become the norm. Alright, so let's break down on how to play it, and we're going to start with the races. Anytime you're talking about a Magicka-based build, of course you're talking about the Altmer. They are still mathematically the best race for this. What sets them apart is the spell charge, with the Magicka recovery. Multiple races have the gift of Magnus Maximum Magicka increase, and a couple of races have the damage buff, but no one really has the Magicka recovery like the Altmer, and for this build they still stand out as the best if you are playing the Altmeri Dominion. Next, I would probably go Dunmer, simply because Templars use a lot of fire damage, and the flame talent for the Dunmer is pretty sweet. Puts them up close near the Altmer, so if you're playing the Ebonheart Pact, Dunmer is the way to go. And for the Daggerfall Covenant, I would go with Breton. Now, those of you that have watched my videos in the past have known that I usually or will often put a Breton above a Dunmer. The reason I did not do so in this time is that this build does not have any spell cost reduction element. And that is the key to what makes Bretons very compelling, is their Magicka Mastery, which reduces spell cost by 3%. For those you may not know this, the devs have announced that that 3% is going to exist outside of the soft caps, which is a fancy way of saying it stacks. On a one-to-one basis, the mathematics, as far as percentages go, the mathematics of reduction are far more powerful than the mathematics of addition. Think of it this way. You have a base number of 100. I reduce it by 75%. Excuse me. It is now 25. If I want to get that 25 back to 100, I have to add 300%, which would be 75. Now you're saying to yourself, yeah, but you did the negative first, or the deduction first. Fine, let's do it the other way. I have a number of 100. I add 300%. That knocks it up to 400. I then take away 75%, which knocks it all the way back down to 100. The problem with Bretons in this build, as I said, is there's no spell combination which is going to stack with the Magicka cost reduction. And the higher the reduction number gets, the more disproportionately powerful the reduction becomes. It almost takes on an exponential element. But because that's not going to happen in this build, the Breton racial isn't isn't going to feed as well as it normally would. So again, I'm going to have to go with Altmer, Dunmer, then Breton, depending on which faction you're playing. Moving on to the background of the build, the tribute points, until there's a change in the soft caps and diminishing returns, like most builds, this is going to be put all 49 points into health. The reason being, it's just too easy to reach the soft caps with armor and enchants. Speaking of which, armor. 7 light armor, trying to stack overall maximum Magicka pool. You're going to want to use the Divine's traits to complement that. As far as the Mundus Stone, the Mage Stone, or depending on where you are, there are times when maybe you want the recovery, so you can use the Atronach. Again, the reason you're using Divines is to complement that. The further you get in this build, though, the more likely you are going to want to use the Mage Stone for the Magicka increase. Your first bar is going to be your DPS bar and is going to feature the Destruction Staff and the DPS class abilities. Now, your exact rotation is going to be dependent upon what you're fighting. Let's start with trivial mobs. You want to open or, if possible, pull with Dark Flare. It has a 1.5 second cast time, making it handy for pulls because you don't want to be using a cast time when something is charging at you. Dark Flare also provides a nice power-up for the next ability used, which in this case is Vampire's Bane. This fits perfectly. It's insta-cast and it provides a snare. So once Dark Flare hits the mob, it aggroes. This is already on its way, snaring the mob, and with the power-up, the dot hits like a truck. Most of the time on trivial mobs, these two abilities will kill it, and because of the snare, it never reaches me. It just dies at my feet, which is, of course, wonderful for the old Epine. With Epine on maximum and our self-confidence at an all-time high, we are ready to take on a boss. So you're going to change your rotation here. With a boss, you are going to open up with Power of Light. Now, this redirects energy as damage towards the boss, but the enemy has to live long enough for this effect to take place, which is why it's not very useful against trivial mobs. This is your single biggest damage dealing ability, and it has a 6-second duration. You are going to want to maximize its uptime. Never clip this because you will lose the big damage element. So it's better to let this temporarily drop and then reapply it after a second than it is to clip it and reapply it early. Maximize its uptime for optimal DPS. After this is applied, we then move back into our Dark Flare and Vampire's Bane rotation. Again, now the power-up element for Dark Flare, I do not believe affects Power of the Light, so you're always going to want to make sure after you use Dark Flare that you apply Vampire's Bane. Vampire's Bane has also a, I believe in game it's actually, I know it's about a 6-second duration, which is roughly the same as Power of the Light, so you can get a rather smooth rotation going. Again, maximize uptime. You can clip Vampire's Bane if you have to. It's never a good idea, but under no circumstances reapply Power of the Light early. Moving on, I'm going to skip over and go to the ultimate. This is Solar Disturbance, and this provides a nice debuff for a boss fight. Again, you want to use this every time it's up. Maximize its uptime. It's not in your rotation because it's an ultimate and you have to build towards it. But anytime that you get it, you definitely want to pop that ability. For AoE, I want to go Pulsar. Now, a lot of people read tooltips or whatever, and they think other capabilities are a lot stronger than Pulsar. You have to understand, AoE mobs tend to die very quickly. And Pulsar takes 10% of their health right off the top. If they die before that effect fades, I haven't really found an ability that hits any harder than that when you factor in that 10%. So Pulsar is still there for my AoE. And finally, Crushing Shock. Now this is here because it's on the Destruction Staff and it provides control. We know that aggro switches away from healers to DPS to tanks, whatever. You always want a control element there. This is a completely optional ability, but I definitely recommend if you're going to be running dungeons or encountering, doing 3 or 4 pulls, you want a control element. Bar 2 is for the heals, and we will be using the Restoration Staff. Now, you're probably asking me, why is Breath of Life in your #1 slot? It's not a particularly heavy heal, and it has a huge magic cost. And the reason is because it is an instacast. Let's face it, the only reason you're on this bar is because somebody probably just fucked something up. And instacast is very important, especially if you just ate the downtime of a weapon swap. This helps you make sure that nobody drops. Now, your primary heal is Lingering Ritual, but that's got a 2-second cast time. So your transition can be iffy here, especially if things are still on the edge. So once you've got, as fast as you can move away from Breath of Light into Rapid Regeneration. Spread some hots around, make sure everybody's got enough to where they're not going to get one hit or dropped before you move into your Lingering Ritual. Now, you're going to want to make this transition as quickly as possible because, as you can see, Breath of Life has a rather large magic cost for a not particularly large heal. So the quicker you can get to Lingering Ritual, the more likely you are going to be to survive the encounter. Moving on, we go to Dark Flare. Now, the reason this is there is you may not have slotted for this run as a healer, and once you've got the situation stabilized, it might not be optimal to eat another weapon downtime, or excuse me, a weapon swap downtime. So this gives you a DPS element on the bar, and then finally, Combat Prayer. You've already eaten up the downtime of switching weapons, you might as well get the DPS buff here. Now, this has a bonus of having a healing element, and let's face it, healers are, I guess the best word would probably be sensitive. So, in order to avoid healer drama, you can throw out Combat Prayer and pretend that you're just doing it for the DPS buff when you're really trying to supplement the heals, and that excuse will help you avoid any kind of healer aggro. Last but not least is Remembrance. So let's remembrance why you are here. Odds are you just uttered the phrase, "oh shit," or "god damn it," and Remembrance helps fix that situation. And the damage mitigation buff is just too powerful to pass up when compared with the other available abilities. And that is everything you would need to know to play the Good Guy Greg Templar build. Comments, questions, concerns, go ahead, ask away in the comments section. I try and reply to everybody as quickly as possible. If you share my absolute hatred for the Google Plus integration, bottom right hand corner is my Twitter address at Dracobor, and I will provide a link to this build in the description.